Hey everyone, James here from TDB, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. So today is going to be the Q&A. I probably end up doing these maybe twice a year or so, but they're fun episodes because oftentimes the best things I can talk about are just stuff that people are interested in and kind of get questions. So usually beforehand, if you miss this one, I will just make a quick video asking people to send me questions, and people will email or comment below, and I will just kind of respond to these questions, compile them into a little Google Doc, which I have in front of me, and go from there. So this one is from Chris, asking for the best resource book, either for referencing tea, regions, mountains, terroir, in depth. In my opinion, at least in my experience, I have not had great luck with the books that I have tried. You can find some, like the Camellia sinensis one is okay. That's by the tea shop in Montreal. I think they have a couple of locations up in Canada. But for the most part, I find that, for me at least, the best resources are usually online. So you can find maps of Yunnan and those places, as well as like Taiwan and the growing regions there. I think those are up on TDB, but they're also up on a lot of other places too. So you don't need to necessarily go to TDB, but there you can find them online. So I would recommend finding something online, depending on what specifically you're interested in. Best way to incorporate Gong Fu tea into a wedding? That's a good question. I personally, I think Gong Fu tea is inherently not very wedding friendly, just because I'm assuming the wedding is more than a few people. If you have a really, really small wedding, then maybe you could do it. But for me, at least, I didn't do Gong Fu tea at my wedding. I think it was a little bit too much of a pain in the butt to try to figure out exactly. But there are things like tea ceremony and stuff like that that you could do. But those tend to be, I think, a little bit different and not really about the taste and stuff like that. I think those, there's a lot of different traditions there. There's like Korean tea ceremony, Japanese tea ceremony, Chinese tea ceremony. So there's all kinds of stuff. I'm not an expert on that, so you'd have to research that on your own. All right, so this one is from Comrade Headcrap. What was the worst experience you ever had ordering tea, stuck at customs for ages, completely wrong order, etc.? That is a good question. I had to think about this one for a little bit when I was looking at this question first. And one that did come to mind is I did buy some very sketchy tea on Taobao right when I was getting started. That was wet stored. I think it's called the Dingxing. In fact, I think we may have done a video on it, so you can go check that out. And initially I was quite high on the tea, but eventually I started to question myself and question whether it was safe or not to have. So I ended up dumping that cake. That tea made it into the Seattle compost. So yeah, that one I would say, it wasn't like terribly expensive, probably like $40 cake, but it was one where I was like, I'd rather dump this $40 cake than screw with my health or something like that. So that was just a very wet stored tea that I was just very uncertain of. I was definitely, it was fairly early on, maybe the first couple of years of my tea journey. So that's kind of what happened there. Joke question: if a viewer gives you tea, will you marry them? No, I am already married. All right, this one is from Chaw Crusade. Greetings again from Australia. Do you have any interesting anecdotes about how your taste palette has evolved during your tea journey? For example, certain notes that you didn't initially like, but then grew to love. Interestingly, I tend to be someone that likes kind of new flavors and tastes and like that, not just in tea, but in food as well. So I've actually found that as I've consumed more tea, my taste has narrowed a bit, and there are certain tea groups that I'm having a lot, and less that I have less often. So like a couple ones that have like maybe not quite made the cut. Some of the heicha, when it has like this certain kind of like big body, but kind of like this emptiness in it, I tend to go for that a little bit less. I don't dislike it, and I'm struggling to describe it right now, but you do run into that if you get into heicha. I don't know, like some Sichuan ones, some Tibetan ones. Not all of them. Some I do actually quite enjoy, but there is definitely kind of like this one flavor profile that I have initially liked for heicha that I tend to like a little bit less. I like my teas to be a little bit more dense, and rich in sort of their overall profile. Another one that, I don't dislike it again either, and I'm perfectly happy to drink it, especially when it's a good quality one. But young pu'erh, I just don't drink it very much, and I used to drink that a lot when I was learning about tea. And, people make a lot of young pu'erh and stuff like that. It's very commonly marketed. So I more or less, close to phased it out of kind of my regular rotation. I'll have it now and then with a friend or something like that. But for the most part, it's not something that I'm looking to buy. It doesn't help that the prices are also quite crazy. All right, this is from Ben N. Who wrote in the intro music and designed the intro logo? Intro logo, I don't know. I think we hired someone or something to do that. Intro music was done by Ray Lump, Denny and my old co-worker, colleague. I don't know what he's up to these days, but yeah, he made the music. Strass 44, what are you looking for in an oolong that you would want to age? Is aging oolong for a short amount of time worth it? From what I understand, aging oolong does not have the same high temperature and moisture requirements that aging pu'erh does. Is aging oolong a good choice for a tea near Libyan West? So this is something that I've seen theorized an awful lot, but it's one that I also have not seen the results of very much at all. In fact, I will probably be one of the people that does have those results in 5 or 10 years. And so one of the tricky things with oolong is, for pu'erh, we do tend to have a good idea of kind of a basic trajectory of pu'erh, and it can depend on if it's factory, if it's boutique, if it's iwu, if it's Monghai, if it's Linsong. So all kinds of different variations. But we do have a good idea of what 5-year-old pu'erh, 10-year-old pu'erh, 15-year-old pu'erh stored in all these different conditions taste like. For oolong, I'm sure there's some people with that experience. I don't have that experience, and I think most people in the West do not have that experience where you're like, okay, this is what 7-year-old oolong stored in kind of like Taiwan in this methodology tastes like. So I think for oolong, it's really, really hard to judge for me kind of when it's in that in-between stage. I've had a lot of oolong that's, in the last 0 to 10 years, and for the most part, that stuff tastes young. And I've also had oolong that starts to get more of that age taste, so 20 plus years. So kind of in that shorter term, you would look for the roast and stuff like that to mellow out and kind of to, I don't know, I don't know exactly how to describe it. But whereas like aged oolong, so 20 plus years, ideally more like 25 to 30, you can start to develop some interesting sweetness, maybe a little herbal notes, but also kind of this plum note you'll often see in aged Taiwanese oolong. That's really tasty, a lot of sweetness and stuff like that. So how do you go from A to B? Will the teas that are in A end up in B? It's hard to say. So in theory, yes, this is something you can do in the West because it is true. It's not something that necessarily requires, I don't know about the temperature, but the moisture, the theory is that you just don't want the tea to get wet. So you would pick something roasted, because the roasting will reduce the amount of moisture within the tea, and then you would kind of just store it and try to prevent it from picking up humidity as it goes. The West, US, Europe, generally going to be a little bit less moist and hot than like Taiwan, so in theory it's much easier to age than pu'erh, and our conditions would actually have a kind of benefit versus Taiwan. Now that's just all very, very theoretical, and we will have to wait and see. But yeah, I do have some oolong aging, so we'll have to see how that turns out. The oldest stuff I have is probably about 10 years old now, so it might be time to give some of that stuff a shot soon. All right, this is from EQT. Have you tried Xiaguan custom commission 2001 and 2003 cakes? Chaguan green mark and yellow mark XY stamp. And then he lists some more. I have tried those teas. I do like the XY. Which one? I think I had the yellow one recently on the show. The green one's also pretty good too. I think I might like the yellow one just a little bit more, if I'm remembering correctly. Mr. Cho's Yiwu Commission Yellow Mark from 2003. I think I've had that too. My opinion of those Xiaguan around that period is generally that I do like them. I do have a hard time kind of buying more than like a sample or something like that. I think they're very interesting. The value, for me, at least someone that likes to buy stuff on discount and stuff, it's not super great. Do you think these are worth $1 to $1.30 a gram? I think absolutely to try. Whether they're worth it to buy a cake and stuff like that, I think does depend a lot person to person. Compared to the value from that same time period, it's a bargain compared to tea that's like 3 or 4 years younger. It's much more expensive. So, your mileage can really vary. And so I think it depends too much on someone's individual financial situation and what their tastes are as far as that goes. I would love to hear your opinion, experience so far on the custom XG commissions, XY, as well as FT. I like them. I think for the most part, they are interesting variations on Xiaguan. For the most part, I found that they do taste kind of like Xiaguan. So if you do like Xiaguan and stuff like that, you're just kind of getting this different vibe, this different take on it. So I do like how those go. How do they compare to a properly not dry stored 01 to 03 8653? I think you're going to find that if you have the more traditionally stored or more wet stored Chaguan cakes, it does quite well. And I think those teas in that range, 2001 to 2003, if they are kind of more traditionally stored, they're probably getting to a real nice point right now. I think the dry stored stuff does take a little bit longer. But again, we're talking about very different profiles, so I think it will depend person to person. Personally, I do like them both. I think for me, the traditionally stored stuff will pass my speed test a little faster, but does it have the same upside as like a more mild stored 1999 8653 will in 20 years? Maybe not. I don't know. Please update us about the state of your oldest stored pu'erh cakes in your own storage with humidity packs. Are they aging good, or is it just a nice storage for drinking up? You haven't done storage videos recently. Well, I will be recording one tomorrow, and I don't know what I'm going to pull out. I will probably try to pull out something youngish just to give what kind of 0 to 8 years looks like, rather than something that went from 8 to 16. So we'll see. For the most part, I have been satisfied with my storage. It's always possible that I'm blind to something going wrong in there, but I have not detected it. The tea does not age fast, but I think if you are someone that did a lot of research and stuff like that, you shouldn't be shocked by that. I'd love to see more early boutique cake opinions videos, 2004 to 2005 Bien Hao, pre-2006 Chen Yuan Hao, pre-2007 Dragon Tea House, even the Hong Cha tasting, YQH, etc. Those are fun teas to bring on. So yeah, I'm glad to see some interest there. I do try to bring on just about everything I have access to. So I am, if there's something particularly interesting to turn me on to, some production, do let me know. Okay. Now we are on to Cam Hooper, who says, what tea categories are hyped up nowadays with perhaps an associated increased price tag, and which are underrated or falling below the radar in popularity that gives great value? So, I would say for the most part, Heicha is probably something that is a little bit underrated, certainly compared to Pu'erh. For comparing it to that, there's a lot of different types of Heicha, so I think your mileage is going to vary depending on what you go for there. Lu Bao is good, so you could try out Three Bears tea for that. In general, you can find much more aged tea for not a super high price compared to Pu'erh, at least. Cam also asked recommendations for Pu'erh sampler, sampling assortment sub $100 to get someone on board the Pu'erh train. I think the most important part is to buy good enough quality. Doesn't have to be great, but good enough, and a variety. Pu'erh is really wide and vast, so you definitely want to get something ripe in there. You want to get something young in there. You want to get something semi-aged and a little more humid stored. And you want to get something semi-aged and a little bit more dryly stored. And ideally, you get something like 2 examples of each one. So you can accomplish this from a variety of places. In sourcing, of course, white tea, crimson lotus, kind of the usual suspects. So you can put together something, So I probably mostly buy from the mid-range, stuff like that. If you have the budget for it, you could also aim for something that's just higher quality, period, and just see how the person likes it too. If you also have access to something a little more wet stored, like traditionally stored, so something like a Yeon, a problem with that is it's not necessarily in the one-stop shop, but you can look at kind of the more humid storage section of something like Yunnan sourcing. It's not going to be exactly the same, but it'll be something different at least. Okay, here's for Anthony, from Anthony. For your younger Shang pu'erh that you want to age out, do you have a method to determine how often you'll check up on this process? No, I don't. I just check it whenever I feel like it. Are there any specific signs you look for, positive, negative progression, or to tell if it has turned a corner? Ever try Western brewing Shang? No, I don't Western brew Shang. That is probably one of the last teas I would Western brew. I could Western brew traditionally stored tea, but for the most part, more dry stored stuff, less so. So specific signs for positive, negative progression, or to tell if it's turned to current order. I mean, generally speaking, tea is going to mellow out as it goes. It's always a challenge to judge it versus past perceptions and stuff like that. So taking notes and stuff like that can be helpful, but it's still inherently kind of limiting. You can't just side by side, what does this tea taste like in 8 years and 13 years? You have to kind of use memory and judge from there. So you would look for a tea to mellow out, but still maintain kind of like intensity of aftertaste, make you feel good and stuff like that. So if something negative would be like if my oolong turned really sour, or if the tea is just kind of acrid and nasty. Dried out tea, you would kind of lose just a lot of vibrancy and things like that. So those are certain ways that it could go wrong or right. All right, this is from GFGH. What sheng do you recommend for strong Xiaguan? Good question. I would say the two areas to check out are both in Shishongbana. I would say Menghai County and kind of the Yiwu eastern Shishongbana area, Menghai County, kind of represent two different sides. I think they both have good Xiaguan. Menghai has, more power and punch up front. Yiwu, the reputation is that it's a little more subtle. There are different variations on both of them, but those are probably the two areas I would look for there. You can aim for young or more aged. Vitalis Monoptropus, I cannot speak. Unpressed pu'erh, general thoughts. In what way is HA still lacking compared to pu'erh? General thoughts on unpressed pu'erh. Fine for casual drinking. Hard to say how it ages. There's a lot of different thoughts there. I think the general consensus is not ideal for aging. In what way does HA still lacking compared to pu'erh? I think it depends what HA we're talking about. HA, very, very broad category. Lu Bao is basically kind of like a small leaf version, at least the contemporary press, that's fermented version of kind of ripe. So for me, at least, they'd occupy kind of a similar niche there. It's done with small leaf varietal, so it's just inherently a little bit different. So some people might find it lacking in longevity and things like that. But there's too many categories of it to kind of just go down individually. But pu'erh, I think a lot of the strength of it is its power and its strong tea and stuff like that. It's a tea that can really hold people's attention. And I think there are certainly some unsung Lu Baos that would apply to as well. But I think that's the reason why pu'erh, one of the many reasons that pu'erh has kind of taken off more. All right, this is from Tom M. Are there any teas that continue to teach you things after many sessions and years? He uses the example of Wistaria Hongyan, Evening Fragrant Jade, 88 QB, Truly Simply Elegant. Those are from Bana Tea. Good teas. Given teas ratings can be controversial amongst online tea communities. What is your opinion towards rating in general? When did you start rating teas? How often do you change your ratings in the past? I would say as far as things that teach you after many sessions, I think those inherently somewhat contradict each other to some extent. For me, the teas that teach me the most are kind of different from what I normally have. So if I have the opportunity to try something dry stored that's like more than 20 years old, that's always super interesting because those teas are very scarce and they're hard to find. And there's a lot of tea that is marketed as dry stored that's not really dry stored at all. So that type of methodology was not common. So I learned a lot every time I've had the 88 QB, just because it's very rare to see something see something like that. And it just really is a very, very powerful reference. I've learned a bit from trying older teas and stuff like that. So I guess teas that I would have, one thing, a couple teas that I do pay attention to that I do have stored is like the Bai Cha Tong from Gerardo over at Far Winwa. I think that's an interesting tea because it's just kind of atypical to find something stored kind of Western, and it had a very specific aroma to it too, enough so that I think some people think something has gone wrong with the storage there. But I've been kind of just interested tracking the progress of it. I think it's hard to find teas that are going to change your perspective on kind of like a daily basis. If you're having a tea every day, you're probably not learning new things each day. Different people will probably disagree with me, but that's kind of my take on it. What is your opinion towards rating in general? When did you start rating teas? How often do you change your ratings from the past? Rating is just kind of spur of the moment how I feel. For me, at least, it's helpful because it's just, you should never overjudge into a rating and stuff like that. There's a lot more to tea than ratings, but I do find it to be very helpful in just terms of my own evaluation. I don't think it cheapens the tea if you don't take it too seriously, at least. So for me, at least, I find the ratings to be exceptionally valuable, and I try not to look at them when I will reevaluate a tea. The ratings will change, of course. There's a lot that happens. Tea changes, pu'erh changes. The storage can impact it. So depending on the past storage history of a certain tea, it could be a little bit different. Even where it is positioned in tong could be different. So you finish off cake, go to the next one. Maybe you don't like the next cake quite as much. And it's just a factor of the individual cake that you have. So, All right, so this is from Son of Saturn. I would like to know what your favorite 2022 teas were from Crimson Lotus and Yunnan sourcing. I haven't tried anything, so I apologize here. He does say that YS, he liked the Manjuan, and the Crimson Lotus KXQM was fire from that year too. She likes that, and the Jingmai. Yeah, sadly I have not tried anything at all. I do like the Bawang from Yunnan sourcing from 2021. I apologize. I just don't have anything that I've had. This is from Cav Kazips. Any raw pu'erh that you would recommend that is very sour in a good way? No. I don't particularly like it when tea gets, when raw pu'erh especially gets sour. So I don't consider that to be a positive tasting note at all. All right. So this is the last question from Tim. So thank you, Tim, again for all the tea you've sent. So he says these are going to be controversial. What do you think defines aging potential, and how is it determined in your opinion? I think it just is kind of like how you think that tea will age. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. I think if you're looking for individual characteristics, you want the tea to be sufficiently strong, but to also have good things like aftertaste, potentially energy, and that sort of thing. If you were to simplify it, I would say kind of reducing it to those characteristics. You would probably pay a little bit less attention to the individual notes and the outward flavors, because those are going to change, especially in storage. What is Oolong, and how is it differentiated from boutique brands that will supposedly age well? This is a continuation of the first question. I mean, Oolong, I think, is when a pu'erh producer will let the leaves oxidize a little bit too much. Initially, that can make the tea taste good because it's a little more oxidized, so it's smoother, kind of brings a little bit more complexity. But overdone, it can impact how a tea will age. Not an expert in this. It's one of those that you can definitely get into some catfights in the pu'erh community for. So I don't want to overstep what I know and my bounds. But yeah, it's something that you would probably run into more in the boutique brands, where there can be a lot of different variety as far as like practices and processing and things like that go. Something that a lot of the Taiwanese producers have been accused of occasionally. I think generally the consensus is that there's an acceptable amount of oxidation that's going to occur because you're kind of taking these leaves from a remote location, but you don't want it to be overdone or to be too much deliberately done too. So yeah, I don't know. People think that it will make the tea not age so well. Again, that's very controversial, so I don't know. At what point does value become subjective? Socioeconomic status differences between drinkers and a price ceiling they set for themselves. In my opinion, value is always very subjective. Like for myself, I tend to have a hard time spending more than 25 cents gram per tea. My economic status has changed a bit over the years, but my tea buying habits and how much I spend in that sense has not really. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, it certainly can make a difference, especially for something like pu'erh, where you're spending a lot up front, but you could be getting a lot of sessions. So you probably want to avoid doing what I've done and accumulating this type of quantity there. So yeah, I think it's always just kind of inherently subjective. So I tried to speak from my own experience there as far as someone that's kind of spending in that 20 to 35 cents a gram range. For price ceiling, I mean, I'm willing to spend a fair amount if it's a small enough quantity. Again, if you're buying like a $10 per gram cake, then that's just 3.57 grand, and that's just a lot of money. Can you unlearn when you've tried something really good but can't afford it? Can you unlearn? I don't know. I mean, I suppose so. You could knock yourself in the head or something like that. Yeah, but I do find that if you can buy kind of like smaller samples of stuff that's really good and get ideally a couple sessions out of it, then that's really valuable. Or from people's generosity, that's something that I have benefited a lot from throughout the years. Is it possible to become an experienced drinker educated in one or more categories of tea without spending a lot of money? Yeah, for sure. It depends what a lot of money is again here, but you can definitely be smart about it. The cost of living here is a lot lower, well, in the US, and I'm specifically in Seattle, than it is in China. So a little bit of money here could be a lot over there too. So there's kind of some inherent complexity as far as like cost of living and things like that, and the cost of kind of these hobbyist goods. You can also benefit from other people sharing and just sharing tea amongst each other, so you can trade samples and try different stuff. And the last question from Tim: how do you feel about the constantly rising cost of tea, and how do you not feel jaded about what you could buy for less money, excluding inflation many years ago? I mean, there's always going to be kind of a hint of resentment, but one thing that I've always found kind of funny and amusing, and maybe we'll give a little bit of perspective, maybe not, is just if you look back, everyone is always bemoaning what people had available to them beforehand. And for the most part, pu'erh has risen since I've started drinking, but it hasn't risen by that insane of amounts. It's like if I scroll back to the old Half Dipper, an old pu'erh blog post, he will start complaining about like people selling like $50 cakes or something like that, as if that's high end. And that's just, it's just all so relative to each other. Because he is looking back and seeing what people from 2002 had available to them. And they had some great stuff available. And we look back at like, I don't know, I guess we'd look back now at, for me at least, I'd look back at like 2007, 2008, because I started drinking in 2012. Whereas someone starting drinking in 2020 might be looking back like, look at this lucky bastard, what he had access to drink in 2015. So it's just always kind of a factor. And, people that got into tea 20 years before me probably still feel the same and stuff like that. There's always like the one that got away and stuff. So in my opinion, just best not to dwell too much. We have the options. We have a good amount of options available to us now. There's a decent chance that in 5 years people will be jealous of those options. But of course, you don't want to buy from a place of scarcity too. So it's complex. I'm not saying go out and buy all the different teas. That's not sustainable either. But buy within your means, and and there's a decent chance that stuff will rise. So teas have always gone kind of out of access and stuff like that, and just kind of the inherent nature of the hobby. So no one's ever going to, well, most people are never going to try everything. I probably won't ever try everything. There are a lot of famous teas that I will probably never have access to, and I'm extremely privileged in the amount of tea that I've been able to try throughout the years. So so I just try to be thankful what you do have access to. Surely by being kind of in the tea community or in like tea Discord and stuff like that, you have access to a whole lot compared to like someone just going into kind of your local tea shop or that sort of deal. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Let me know how you enjoyed this Q&A. I hope it was interesting and informative, and I will see you all next time.